The galaxy bled light from its wounds, as if the stars themselves were dying. In the wake of Cadia's fall, the night was no longer a shelter, but a vast red scar across the heavens. The cicatrix maledictum, the great rift, tearing reality in two. Worlds that once prayed beneath the Emperor's steady light now found themselves swallowed in shadow, their skies flickering with impossible colours, whispering voices, and the restless glow of unreality. Millions cried out across the void, but no answer came. The Imperium endured, yes, but in the way a body endures after a sword has pierced its heart. And in that endless darkness, a single vessel drifted, the herald of dawn, broken, battered, yet refusing to fall. Its hull was scarred with melted ceramite and the impact of shattered moons. Its engines groaned as if the ship itself were in mourning. It had escaped Cadia, escaped the end of a world, but the memory of that fall clung like ash, unshakable. Lord Marshal Arcturus Vale stood in the observation hall, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed upon the great rift's impossible glow. His armour, once immaculate Cadian steel and gold, bore the scars of collapsing fortresses and burning continents. Dust and soot clung to the ridges of his pauldrons like ghosts refusing to be washed away. He had survived. But survival was not victory. It was a burden. The galaxy was breaking, and he was among the last who had seen it shattering from the ground itself. For a moment, the hall was silent until the whisper returned. You did not fail. You saved them. You saved so many. They live because of you. He closed his eyes. The voice was not external. No Vox relay carried it. No warp presence flared. It spoke from memory, yet it felt alive. He remembered the final moments on Cadia, the sky ripping apart, demons walking through fire, orbiting defense platforms falling like dying suns. He had made a choice then, an unthinkable one. In those last seconds, he had listened to something that promised a way out, a path to survival. He had believed it, and now it lingered. He did not answer it. He couldn't. He breathed out slowly and forced his thoughts into order. Duty before memory, command before fear. The lives aboard this vessel depended on clarity, not ghosts. The door hissed open behind him. "Lord Marshal," came a voice, steady, calm, sharpened by discipline. Sister Archivist Cadia stepped into the hall, her white and crimson robe swaying with movement. A warrior scholar of the Order's dialogues, she carried both blade and scripture. Her face bore the tired poise of one who had witnessed too much suffering and had decided to endure it anyway. "We are approaching the Sirethal front," she said. "Reports confirm the system is still under Imperial control, but communications are degraded. Astropathic messages are fragmentary. There is fighting there, heavy fighting." Vale nodded, but did not turn from the view. "How many survivors do we carry now?" 18,432 registered, Cadia replied. "Many more unregistered. Civilian clusters from the lower decks still remain uncounted. Survivors, not soldiers, not assets. People clinging to the hope that the Imperium was still real, still capable of protecting them." He exhaled once, then spoke. "We will not allow another world to fall without resistance, not while breath remains in our lungs." Cadia studied him, her gaze quiet, evaluating him not as a commander, but as a man bearing a wound no medic could see. "You have not slept," she observed. "No," Vale replied. "You should. That is a luxury I forfeited on Cadia." Cadia said nothing more. She did not need to. They walked from the observation hall together, boots echoing along metal floor plating scarred by impact. The corridors were full, displaced soldiers leaning against bulkheads, families huddled around dim lumen strips, medici tending to the wounded on makeshift cots. Conversations were quiet, as if no one wished to draw the attention of fate. Some looked at Vale as he passed, not with cheering, not with worship, with need, with the desperate belief that if he was still standing, then the galaxy was not lost. He felt that weight, and he let it settle. On the command deck, the air was tense. Strategos hololiths flickered with unstable Vox signal feeds from the Kyrithal system. Worlds once bright with city lights now flickered under emergency protocols. Void ships fought in orbit, but their signals glitched, distorted, half-eaten by the warp turbulence spreading like infection. General Rennick, commander of the surviving ground regiments, turned as Vale entered. His armor was polished, his posture sharp, but his eyes were too calculating. A man who had lost much, yet still measured everything for what could be gained. Vale knew the type. He needed Rennick for now, but trusted him no more than a blade left unsheathed. "Lord Marshal," Rennick said, "Cyrithel is fracturing. If we seize orbit now, we can stabilize Imperial presence in the sector. If we wait," he tapped the hololith, "it will fall, and the refugees we carry will have nowhere to go." Vale studied the projections. The battle was winnable, but not without cost. And every cost now felt like cutting meat from a starving body to keep moving. He spoke only one word: prepare for engagement. The deck moved at once, officers relaying commands, helmsmen adjusting course, gunners readying broadside cannons, void shields flaring awake like slumbering beasts. As the Herald of Dawn descended toward Cyrithel, Vale rested his hand on the railing, steadying himself against the tremor of distant explosions. The whisper returned, softer now, like a memory that wanted to be forgiven. "They will break Arcturus. Worlds fall, empires rot. You cannot hold back the tide, but I can show you how to make the tide kneel." He clenched his jaw. His voice, when he answered, was quiet, but iron. "You will not command me." The whisper did not laugh. It sighed. The Herald of Dawn entered battle. Gunfire lit the void. Warp storms flickered like lightning across the heavens. Cyrithel burned, but did not yet fall. Vale raised his sword and spoke to those who listened, to thousands who heard his voice through Vox, through corridors, through open, frightened eyes. "We are what remains. We are what still stands. Cadia did not fall. It endures in us. We do not break. We do not yield. Not now. Not ever." A roar rose, not of triumph, but of survival. A fragile flame in endless night, and for the first time since Cadia collapsed beneath his feet, Arcturus Vale believed, if only for a moment, that hope could still be real. But the whisper waited. It always waited. The Herald of Dawn plunged into the conflict around Cyrithel, like a wounded beast returning to the hunt. Void shields flared white as lancefire scraped against them, and the thunder of macro cannon salvos rippled through the ship's hull. The stars outside were drowned in streaks of fire and drifting wreckage. Imperial frigates burning in silence. Dark Mechanicus warships twisted with glowing runes of hate, and demonic silhouettes flickering where the veil thinned. It was not a clean battlefield. It was a graveyard still trying to decide who was allowed to die. Arcturus Vale stood at the upper command tier, posture unbroken, gaze fixed upon every shifting tactical line. His voice was calm, precise, a steady cadence that cut through fear. Crews rallied at the sound of it. Officers, exhausted and fraying from the long retreat from Cadia, found steadiness in those few measured words. Yet beneath that composure, Vale felt the whisper again, silent as breath along the edges of thought. You see how they look to you, how they cling. They are drowning men reaching for anything that floats. And you, Arcturus, you are wood in a storm, but wood sinks. He ignored it. He had learned to give it no shape, no welcome. Helm, adjust 90 Mark III. Shift our broadside and interpose hull between the civilian transport cluster and that cruiser, Vale commanded. Aye, Lord Marshal, came the reply. The ship groaned, veering its mass into the path of an oncoming barrage. Armor plating buckled but held. General Rennick approached from the lower tier, his expression composed, yet edged. We are absorbing fire we do not need to, he said in a voice too careful. Our priority must be securing stable orbit. If we lose maneuvering thrusters, the entire operation collapses before we even make landfall. Vale did not look at him. If we leave those transports, they die before we reach the atmosphere. Every life is a soldier's hope, General. Burn their hope now, and the war is over before our boots touch soil. Rennick's jaw tightened, but he bowed his head. Understood. Not agreement, obedience. The difference mattered. A tremor rolled through the deck as the Herald fired a sustained barrage. The enemy cruiser's hull ruptured like bone under a hammer, venting fire and bodies into the void. The civilians lived. This hour. Vale felt the whisper pulse again, warm as blood running down a blade. You make these decisions as though you believe the galaxy still cares who lives and who dies. He forced breath through his chest and stepped back from the hololithic display. Prepare ground deployment. We secure Cyrithal Primus before its defense command fractures entirely. Cadia, who had remained near the astropathic choir pit, stepped closer. Our intelligence indicates insurrection on the surface. Planetary defense forces are splintered between loyalists and those who believe the Imperium abandoned them. That belief spreads faster than heresy, Vale murmured. She nodded. And strikes deeper. He met her gaze, and for a moment, the mask of leadership thinned. She was the only one who saw it. The quiet weight, the fracture line running through him like a hairline crack in a statue. Unseen until pressure broke it wide. When did we become carriers of despair instead of faith? Vale asked. When the sky tore open, Cadia answered softly. No comfort, only truth. Moments later, deployment alarms sounded across the ship. Hallways filled with guardsmen adjusting helmets, checking ammunition, fastening purity seals to chest plates. Some knelt before makeshift shrines, flickering candles before the cracked aquila, lips whispering the Emperor's name like a child calling for a parent who might not answer. Vale walked among them. He did not speak, yet his presence steadied their shaking hands. He reached the drop hangar where armoured transports waited, engines rumbling. Rennick was already there, directing troop columns. His every command was sharp, efficient, practiced. A commander who had learned to lead from ambition, not faith. Your orders for deployment? Rennick asked. Vale surveyed the holotable, tracing the front with a gloved hand. The planetary capital, Cyrithal Primus, flickered under waves of red indicator runes. We strike at the Aegis Bastion first, Vale said. If we take the planetary command spire intact, we can broadcast stabilizing orders across the sector. The loyalists will rally. The heretics will break. Rennick's expression flickered, just briefly, with something like calculation. A bold thrust, high risk. Everything is high risk, Vale replied. We choose the risks that matter. He stepped into the lead transport. The whisper followed. They will not thank you for this. They will not remember Cadia. They will not remember you. But I will. The hatch closed. The descent through the atmosphere was violent. Turbulence tossed the transports like toys in the fists of angry gods. Plasma bolts streaked past the hull. One transport in the formation took a direct hit and disappeared in a bloom of flame. Vale did not look away. You did not turn from death. To do so was to lie to yourself about the cost. The carriers broke cloud cover, and Kyrithel Primus spread out below them. Once a proud city of spired cathedrals and shining banners. Now its avenues burned. Barricades choked its streets. Great statues of imperial heroes lay toppled and shattered in the courtyards where children once learned hymns to the Emperor. They landed in the outer plaza of the bastion. The doors dropped open. The world became gunfire and smoke. Vale stepped into the chaos without hesitation, power sword igniting in a flare of blue-white. Lass fire cracked around him. A heretic charged with a chain axe. Vale met him with a single cut that severed arm from shoulder. He did not revel in the kill. He simply moved to the next. Rennick's command squad secured the flanking streets. Cadia fought at Vale's side, her blade swift and precise, her voice calm as she recited litanies between breaths. The loyalists rallied behind them, emboldened not by certainty of victory, but by refusal to break. But even in the heart of battle, the whisper did not quiet. Look upon them. They kill and bleed for a corpse on a throne. You could give them certainty. You could give them truth. You could give them a new dawn. Vale gripped his sword tighter, cutting down another foe. I did not ask for your counsel, he hissed under his breath. But you did, the whisper replied gently. On Cadia, when the world ended. The memories surged, shattered fortresses, the sky cracking open, the impossible presence reaching for him in the fire. For one heartbeat, his foot faltered. Cadia noticed. A cultist's blade nearly struck his throat. Calia's parry intercepted it, and her follow-through cut the heretic down. She spoke through the clash of steel and gunfire. Your mind is not here. Vale exhaled slowly. It is here. I am here. But her eyes said she was not convinced. The plaza shook as artillery struck the upper wall of the bastion. Dust rained from above. A Vox officer sprinted toward them, shouting above the gunfire. Lord Marshal, Loyalist command reports a rally point within the inner citadel. They are surrounded. If we do not move now. Vale raised his sword, voice carrying across the plaza, across smoke and screams and flickering firelight. We advance. We drive them back. We reclaim what remains. The troops surged forward, pushing toward the bastion gates, but the whisper spoke once more, soft as breath at his ear. And with every step, Arcturus, you walk closer to me. The charge toward the bastion's inner gate became a brutal push of bodies, gunfire and smoke. The air choked with burned promethium and pulverized stone. Every breath tasted of metal and ash. Loyalist lines tightened as Vale advanced, his presence a fulcrum of motion. Behind him, banners once carried proudly now hung in tatters. Yet the soldiers rallied to their shredded colours as though they were whole. The bastion gates were massive adamantine slabs engraved with imperial script, though soot and shrapnel scars obscured much of it. The gates had not fallen. They had been sealed from the inside. The defenders were alive, but besieged. Heretic forces had dug in around the entrance, fortified by overturned transports and makeshift barricades of rubble. Their war cries were not the unhinged screams of mindless cultists. These were men who once stood under the same oaths, now twisted by fear, doubt, or a promise of survival made by darker powers. Rennick barked orders to artillery squads. Mortars on the barricade. Do not hit the gate. His voice cut through the chaos with calculated clarity. He knew when to restrain and when to push, and Vale recognized in him a commander shaped by necessity, not honor. Rennick might yet follow where Vale led, but Vale sensed the man's loyalty was to outcome, not conviction. The first mortar shells struck, throwing bodies and shrapnel across the plaza. The earth trembled beneath the explosion's weight. Vale moved in. He did not shout commands now. His soldiers knew to follow. Cadia was beside him, blade flickering in measured arcs, her movements surgical where his were forceful. Last bolts brushed her robes, burning edges but never slowing her advance. The enemy broke unevenly. Some fled deeper into the citadel's shadowed courtyards. Others hurled themselves forward, seeking martyrdom on Vale's blade. He granted it without hesitation. The clash was not elegant. It was survival sharpened to a point. When the last barricade defender fell, Vale lifted his gauntlet and signaled. Engineers rushed forward, attaching melter charges to the sealed gate. Cadia stepped close, the roar of battle quieting to a steady thrum around them. "You heard it again, did you not?" she asked. Vale's jaw tightened. "This is not the time. It is precisely the time." She looked at him, not with accusation, but with concern wrapped in iron. "Whatever followed you from Cadia is not merely memory." The whisper stirred as if summoned. "She sees more clearly than the rest. You could trust her if trust were not a dying language." He forced his focus outward. "After we secure the command spire, we will speak. Until then, hold your doubts. I need your clarity." She inclined her head. Not submission. Agreement held in tension. The melter charges detonated. The gate glowed white-hot, metal sagging inward like wax. Soldiers surged through the breach. Inside the bastion's courtyard, the battle intensified. Heavy stubbers roared from parapets. Heretics clung to elevated firing positions, raining bullets onto the advancing loyalists. The enemy had numbers here, fractured, divided, but dug in and desperate. Rennick raised his vox slate and shouted orders for flanking suppression fire. His forces moved with precision, but even efficiency could not outpace chaos. A mortar shell detonated near his position, throwing him back. Vale caught the ripple of hesitation among their lines. He stepped forward, sword raised high enough for every eye to catch. "Advance," his voice carried, not loud, but unyielding. "The Emperor watches. We do not falter." The line reformed. They pressed deeper, step by grueling step, until the final barricades fell and the innermost courtyard lay open. At its center, surrounded by loyalist defenders half strangled by exhaustion and wounds, stood the planetary commander. Governor Halbrecht, once a proud steward of Kyrithil, now gaunt and shaking, armor dented and robes torn. His soldiers, what remained of them, clustered around him, forming a ring of bodies that had not broken. When his eyes lifted and found Vale's, something like relief flickered, followed instantly by grief. "Lord Marshal," Halbrecht rasped. "Cadia. They said Cadia fell. I believed it was propaganda. I prayed it was." Vale did not answer at first. The silence was answer enough. Halbrecht's shoulders sagged under the weight of it. "Then we are living in the age of endings." Vale stepped closer. "We are living in the age where endings must be refused." Halbrecht let out a brittle sound, half laugh, half sob. "You speak as though hope is a resource we still possess." Vale looked at the wounded clustered throughout the courtyard, the soldiers propped against walls, the banners burned to threads, and he said, "Hope is not a resource, it is defiance." Something in the courtyard shifted, not cheer, not fervor, but breath, shared breath, the kind that holds a line. Rennick arrived then, limping slightly, dust marking his armor. "The heretics are falling back to the manufactorum quarter," he reported. "We can pursue, press the advantage while their lines are fractured." Halbrecht shook his head. "The manufactorum sprawl is a labyrinth. They will draw you in and bleed you dry. They know its tunnels better than any living map." Rennick looked to Vale, expectation sharp. "If we don't pursue, they regroup. They reinforce. We lose momentum." Logic. Tactically correct. Strategically necessary. But Vale heard the whisper before he spoke. "Push now, and you burn out your strength. Hold now, and you lose the thread of victory. You see, the galaxy no longer offers choices, only consequences." Vale weighed the silence. He closed his fist slowly. "No pursuit," he said. "We hold the bastion, secure a perimeter, establish communication lines and rearm." Rennick did not hide the displeasure in his eyes, but he saluted and carried out the command. That displeasure would matter later. Vale knew it. Cadia moved to the wounded, helping medici dress wounds, reciting quiet litanies of endurance. Halbrecht knelt beside fallen soldiers, whispering their names in a voice that trembled. Vale stepped back from the courtyard and looked up at the sky. The rift glowed beyond the cloud cover, a wound stitched through reality. The whisper settled like a hand upon his shoulder. "You think you are preserving them. What you are preserving is the slow crushing of hope beneath inevitability. There is another way." His breath caught, not in fear, but in familiarity. The whisper was not foreign. It was memory. It was the promise given in Cadia's final hour, when everything burned. He remembered the ground splitting open. He remembered the light swallowing the sky. He remembered a voice offering a door when all others were shut. He had said yes, and he realized now the voice had not left him because he had not let it go. He whispered aloud, barely audible, "Not again." "But you already have." The bastion was secured. Cyrithal Primus held. The Imperial banner flew again above the gate. Yet the victory did not feel like salvation. It felt like the first step of a descent he could no longer name. Night settled over Cyrithal Primus like ash drifting after a fire. The flames of battle still smouldered in distant districts, casting flickering orange reflections against the shattered city walls. Vox relays crackled with fragmentary reports. Wounded soldiers moaned softly, and the bastion's courtyard, now secured, felt less like a fortress reclaimed and more like the eye of a storm that had not yet passed. Vale walked the ramparts alone. The stone beneath his boots was cracked, darkened with centuries of wear, now layered with fresh blood. The wind that moved through the city carried scents of promethium smoke, rust, and the faint sour tang of fear. There was no triumph here, only endurance. Below, loyalist forces worked to rebuild firing positions, erect sandbag lines, and torch the corpses they could not bury. Flames rose in small clusters throughout the city where pyres burned. In that wavering firelight, the soldiers' faces appeared hollowed, sculpted by fatigue. Every figure moved not with the pride of victory, but with the heaviness of those who had survived one tragedy, only to find themselves in another. Cadia approached, her footsteps soft against the stone. She did not speak immediately. Her presence was a quiet acknowledgement of the silence that Vale wrapped around himself. "Command relays are stabilizing," she said at last. "We have restored partial communication with 2 nearby sectors. Reinforcements are not expected." Vale nodded once. "So we are alone here." "For now," she replied, "though isolation is not always abandonment." He did not answer. His gaze remained on the burning city. Cadia stepped closer, trying to read him. "You have not told me what happened on Cadia. Not truly. Not the moment you carry with you. There is no sense burdening others with ghosts." "The ghost is not the problem," she replied simply. "The silence is." The whisper stirred, as though it had been waiting for those words. "She is afraid for you. That is almost admirable. But she fears the wrong thing. She fears what hunts you. She should fear what you could become." Veil's hand tightened on the rampart, fingers scraping stone. He forced the words through his throat. "I made a choice, a desperate one." "You survived," Cadia said, "when many did not. Survival is not shameful." "That depends entirely on the cost." Her eyes sharpened, but she did not press further. Below in the courtyard, Rennick was speaking with officers, his gestures tight and controlled. He turned occasionally to glance up at Veil, calculating, as always. Rennick saw the soldiers' growing reliance on Veil. He saw the myth forming, and where some would find honor in that, Rennick saw opportunity. Veil recognized the hunger forming in the man. Not admiration, not loyalty, but ambition shaped by the knowledge that the galaxy was entering an age where power unmoored from stability could rise unchecked. The command spire lights flickered as power relays continued to stabilize. Hololithic maps updated slowly, showing enemy positions reorganizing deeper in the manufactorum sprawl. Veil watched the shifting lines. The enemy was not retreating blindly. They were regrouping with purpose. "The manufactorum district is still theirs," Cadia said, following his gaze. "If they hold it, they hold the city's supply lifeline. They will use it to bleed us slowly," Veil murmured. "Starve us of ammunition. Wear us down through attrition and desperation." Rennick approached the rampart stairs then, climbing with a deliberate pace that invited notice. "Lord Marshal," he said as he reached them, offering a sharp salute. "Reconnaissance patrols confirm the heretics are consolidating their forces in the central foundry complex. It's a fortress in all but name, but if we take it quickly, we sever their command structure entirely." Veil looked at him, reading the eagerness beneath the tactician's words. Rennick wanted the decisive strike, one bold action to shift the war, and more importantly, to secure his own legacy beside the man he currently followed. "We are in no condition for a direct assault," Veil said. "Our forces require rest, rearmament, and triage. To strike now would be to burn our strength for the sake of momentum." Rennick's expression flickered. Not defiance, frustration. "Every hour we delay gives them time to dig deeper. They know the terrain. They have numbers. Waiting only strengthens them." Veil stepped closer, voice even but firm. "War is not decided by haste. This is not a race to the kill. It is a test of endurance, of will. We hold what we have. We rebuild. Then we strike." Rennick held his gaze for a moment that lingered just a shade too long. Then he nodded. "As you command." And he left. Cadia watched him go with quiet scrutiny. "He will not accept that easily." "No," Veil said. "He will not." He exhaled, long and slow. "But he will obey, for now." The whisper moved like shadow through his mind. "He will betray you when it benefits him. They all will. They always do. But you already knew that. You learned it when Cadia died." Veil closed his eyes briefly. The whisper was not wrong. That was what made it dangerous. He leaned forward slightly over the rampart, looking at the manufacturum district in the distance, its towering smokestacks still burning with flames too controlled, too deliberate. Someone was preparing something there. The night did not offer rest. It offered a grim vigil. Eventually, Veil descended the ramparts and made his way through the bastion's interior corridors. The walls here were lined with frayed banners and devotional icons cracked from years of neglect. He stopped at a small alcove once meant for prayer. A broken aquila lay on the floor, one wing snapped away. He knelt, not to pray, not to seek forgiveness, but to remember. The weight of Cadia's final moment pressed in, the ground convulsing under orbital bombardment. Titans falling like wounded gods. Blackstone pylons burning with impossible light, the sky tearing open. Demons pouring through like water spilling over a shattered dam. And then the voice. Not booming, not commanding. Soft like a hand reaching out in the dark. You can save them. You do not have to watch them die. He remembered the terror, the desperation, the certainty that all paths led to death. He remembered choosing the one that did not. His breath shuddered. He opened his eyes. Cadia stood at the edge of the alcove, silent. She had not followed him intentionally. She had simply found him here, as though drawn by the gravity of his suffering. She knelt beside him. "You do not need to carry this alone," she said. Her voice was steady, not comforting, anchoring. Vale looked at her, really looked at her, the clarity in her gaze, the steadiness of her presence, and he realized the truth. The whisper wanted isolation. He had allowed it. He spoke, his voice low, rough. "On Cadia, I heard something. In the moment when everything was collapsing. Something promised a way out, a way to survive. And I listened. I listened because I could not..." His voice cracked on the memory. "I could not watch them all die." Cadia did not recoil, did not judge, did not respond with scripture or condemnation. She spoke only 4 words. "Do you regret it?" Vale exhaled. "Yes. No. Both. I do not know," he said. And the whisper answered, soft as breath against his ear. "You do. That is why you fear me." Vale closed his eyes, and for the first time since Cadia, he allowed himself to be afraid. Outside, in the manufactorum sprawl, a horn sounded, a long, low, resonant note that carried across the city like a funeral bell. The enemy had not been waiting. They had been preparing. Vale stood, every muscle coiling into readiness. "Soundful alert," he said, voice steady once more. "They come." The night did not wait. It pressed in. And Cyrithel braced for what was next. The horn's echo lingered across the ruined skyline, reverberating through shattered spires and gutted plazas. It was not a call of retreat or surrender. It was a declaration. The enemy was assembling. Something larger than scattered heretic bands now stirred within the manufacturum district. Vale could almost feel the ground tighten beneath his boots, as though the city itself braced for the next breath before a scream. Alarms flared across the bastion. Vox relays crackled to life, officers shouting orders as squads formed ranks, and armoured vehicles rolled into defensive positions. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating the courtyard in harsh white beams that cut through the smoke-thickened air. Wounded soldiers dragged themselves to positions where they could fire, refusing to be left powerless when the next wave came. Rennick strode to the command platform, armour scuffed, but posture unwavering. Scouts confirm large enemy movement. They're pushing from the manufacturing walls. Numbers unclear, heavy infantry, makeshift armour, possibly demon-infused war engines. They know we've stabilized the bastion. They aim to break us before we can reinforce. Vale nodded, absorbing the details without visible reaction. They strike now because they fear we may reclaim the city. He stepped forward, gaze fixed on the dark district to the east, where smoke rose in thick coils. Fear makes them bold. Rennick's expression tightened. bold enough to overwhelm us if we're not decisive. He leaned closer, voice lowering. We should launch a preemptive assault. Hit them before their forces fully consolidate. If we allow them to dictate the pace... No, Vale said, the word firm but not sharp. We meet them here, behind fortifications, with controlled lanes of fire. Rennick's jaw tensed. We had the chance to strike hours ago. Now we wait for them to come to us. We're giving up initiative. We are stabilizing our strength, Vale replied, not feeding it to the grinder. Rennick held his gaze, and something passed between them. Words unspoken, a fracture forming like a fault line under shifting plates. He saluted and turned away to relay orders, but his shoulders were stiff with dissatisfaction. Cadia approached as the troops moved into formation. You believe the manufacturing forces are coordinated, that there is a leader directing them. Vale's eyes traced the distant glow of the forges. Someone is shaping this conflict with more than desperation. Someone who knows how to turn fear into loyalty. Cadia's expression darkened. A planetary governor would not inspire that kind of obedience, nor a common heretic cult leader. No, Vale agreed. This is something else. The whisper stirred, a presence behind thought. You can sense it because you have stood where they stand. Choice is the currency of survival. You made yours, they have made theirs. He did not respond. He refused to give the whisper shape in his expression. The city shook then. Distant rhythmic tremors pulsing through the stone, as if a colossal heart were beating beneath the manufactorum's foundations. Troops on the ramparts shifted uneasily. Even seasoned veterans stiffened, hands tightening on laser guns and bolters. Rennick's voice cut through the bastion. Incoming! Shapes emerged from the manufactorum haze. Dozens first, then hundreds, then more. Figures clad in ragged armor and stolen uniforms, their banners crudely repainted with symbols of flame and spiraling eyes. At their center marched heavy shapes cobbled together from industrial lifters, plating welded over cargo frames, engines growling like caged beasts. War engines built not with strategy, but with fury. They advanced without hesitation. The first volley rang out. Las fire streaked across the open ground, cutting down the front line. Mortar rounds fell among the advancing mass, throwing bodies and metal fragments into the air, but still they came, driven by something stronger than fear of death. Vale stood upon the battlements, voice steady as he called orders. Keep firing. Do not let them mass at the walls. Target the walkers' joints. Break their momentum. The defenders obeyed. Heavy stubbers roared. Plasma cannons glowed white-blue as they fired. The first of the makeshift war engines shuddered as its leg joint melted under plasma heat, collapsing sideways in a shower of sparks and torn metal. It crushed several heretics beneath its weight, but the wave did not break. Rennick coordinated artillery fire with precise efficiency. Range 3. Adjust 2 degrees east. Fire. Explosions tore through the enemy ranks, scattering bodies and equipment. But as smoke billowed, figures stepped through it, those marked by warp-tainted blessings. Their eyes glowed with reflected firelight. Their flesh bore sigils cut into scar tissue. They advanced at a pace that felt wrong, as though pain no longer mattered. Vale leapt from the battlement and descended into the courtyard, striding toward the front gate, where the line would hold or fall. Cadia followed without hesitation, her presence silent but unwavering. The gates opened just wide enough for disciplined counter-strike formations to emerge. Vale stood at the front, his sword ignited, the power field humming with contained fury. Soldiers formed up behind him, shields raised, formation tight. The enemy crashed against them. The clash was immediate and violent. Blades screeched against armor. Last bolts flared point blank. Vale moved with practiced precision, each strike economical, each motion carrying weight and purpose. He cut through a charging axeman, twisted to deflect a spear thrust, and drove his blade into the heart of the next foe without losing pace. He did not fight like a hero. He fought like a man who no longer expected anything to save him. Cadia fought beside him, her sword tracing arcs that caught the light like glimmering script. She did not waste movement. She did not flinch. She was there each time Vale's guard opened, filling the gap, steady as breath. Rennick's forces flanked from the right, applying disciplined pressure. The courtyard ground became a churning mass of bodies and mud, blood soaking into the cracks of stone. And still, Vale felt it. The presence. Watching. Waiting. Do you see now? They do not fear death. They have already been promised a future beyond it. The same promise I offered to you. Vale roared as he cut down another attacker, the sound tearing from him like something ripped loose. The whisper only softened. You made your choice to save them. Why pretend otherwise? A war engine lurched forward, its heavy claw swinging toward the defensive line. Vale broke from formation and sprinted toward it. Every motion driven by instinct honed through a lifetime of war. He leapt, driving his sword into the engine's exposed cabling. The machine convulsed, metal shrieking as arcs of electricity burst across its plating. Vale pushed deeper, tearing through conduits, ripping free the power core's stabilizing vents. The machine exploded in a burst of flame. He hit the ground hard, dust and heat washing over him. Cadia was there, pulling him up before he could falter. The tide of the enemy began to waver. Not break, but slow. Their momentum no longer devoured distance. Loyalists pushed forward with renewed force, every breath marked by survival rather than hope. At last, the heretics withdrew, pulling back into the manufactorum sprawl, leaving the plaza battered and soaked in blood. The defenders did not cheer. They simply stood, panting, shaking, alive. The night fell silent again, though the silence felt thinner now, strained. Rennick approached, armor dented and streaked with soot. We held, he said, but they tested our defenses. They were probing. They wanted to see where the line would break. Vale nodded once, and they found that it did not. For now, Rennick answered. His eyes said what he did not speak aloud. It will break next time. Cadia touched Vale's arm lightly, drawing his attention. There was something else among them, a presence, not seen but felt. Vale met her gaze. He did not speak. He did not have to. She already knew. The whisper lingered, gentle as breath. He is coming. Vale exhaled, and the first cracks of what lay ahead opened beneath him. The courtyard smelled of smoke and blood, long after the last clash of steel had fallen silent. The pyres burned again, their flames casting long shadows against the bastion walls, where scarlets and golds flickered over armor and stone. The wounded were taken below, the dead laid in rows and covered with torn banners until burial could be granted. The city was quiet now, but it was not peace. It was the breath drawn before a lung must scream again. Vale walked among the wounded with no words of comfort, only presence. A commander who spoke too easily of honor or sacrifice risked insulting the weight these soldiers carried. Some looked up when they saw him, and their eyes steadied, not because they believed they would live, but because he had chosen to stand where they stood. He did not offer them promises he could not keep, only witness. Rennick approached from the far side of the courtyard, his armor refitted and polished. The quick repairs of a man who understood appearances mattered even when blood was still wet on the ground. The enemy has pulled back into the Manufactorum core, he reported. Scouts observe barricades forming on all major approach roads. They are preparing for a siege. Vale nodded, eyes following the faint industrial glow rising from the distant spires where the Manufactorum towers pierced the smoky sky. The factories had once armed thousands. Now they produced weapons for rebels, traitors, and something unseen that guided them. They know we will be forced to come to them, Vale said. Even if we bleed them here, as long as they hold the heart of production, they can continue this war indefinitely. Rennick crossed his arms. Then we must strike. Delay only worsens our position. They will starve us and draw us into attrition we cannot win. Vale did not look at him. We are not ready. We cannot wait, Rennick countered, voice no longer masking his frustration. Every hour strengthens their hand and weakens ours. Cadia appeared beside them, her presence quiet but not unnoticed. She had spent the last hours among the Medicae, offering liturgical solace and stabilizing those whose bodies fought to remain whole. Fatigue lined her expression, but her gaze was steady. There is something more at work in the Manufactorum, she said. The heretics fight not as fractured deserters or opportunists. They are organized, directed, bound to a purpose greater than survival. Rennick scoffed. You speak of demonic influence. Cadia held his gaze without blinking. I speak of intent shaped by a will, not frenzied abandon. Vale felt the whisper coil again, closer now, as though proximity to the Manufactorum district had thinned whatever Vale kept it half distant. She is correct. You feel him, do you not? The one who answered your call, the one you opened the door for. He seeks you. Vale's fingers curled against the stone railing. He said nothing. Rennick continued, unable to see the silent struggle. If we do not strike now, we lose momentum. The men feel it. They begin to question the stalemate. Some whisper, we are afraid. Vale turned then, his voice even but sharpened. Let them whisper. They are alive to do so. His gaze held Rennick's. A commander who fears delay more than loss does not seek victory. He seeks spectacle. Rennick's jaw stiffened. For a moment, the tension between them was a blade one breath from drawing blood. But Rennick saluted sharply and withdrew, pride rearranged behind discipline. Cadia waited until he was gone. He will test you, she said. He believes hesitance is weakness. And you? Vale asked. I believe restraint is strength only if it is not fear, she replied. He did not answer. They both knew that what hunted him in silence was not mere memory. It was an unfinished vow. Later, in the war planning chamber beneath the command spire, Vale stood before the hololithic map of Serathal Primus. Red and blue tactical markers flickered with irregular vox static. The Manufactorum district rendered in tangled geometry of pipes, causeways, and furnace chambers. It was a labyrinth of metal, darkness, and fire, an ideal ground for ambushes and drawn-out engagements. The door opened quietly, and Governor Halbrecht entered. His face was lined, his every step heavy with guilt and exhaustion. He bowed his head deeply. Lord Marshal, I would speak with you privately. Vale dismissed the Strategos attendants. The chamber fell silent. Halbrecht approached the hololith, staring at the Manufactorum's glowing outline as though it were a nightmare he recognized. When the rift opened, he began, voice thin. Many here lost faith. They looked to the sky and saw the Emperor's light broken. Some wanted to hold, others sought another answer. Vale said nothing. The governor continued. There was a man, a preacher. He appeared not long after we lost contact with the Segmentum Command. He spoke of salvation not through obedience, but through strength. He said the galaxy had shifted into a new age, and the Emperor's silence meant liberation, not doom. Halbrecht swallowed. He promised them certainty. The whisper brushed Vale's ear. Certainty, the one thing you crave and fear in equal measure. Vale's jaw tightened. This preacher, who is he? Halbrecht shook his head slowly. He called himself the voice of the Ascendant. He said he had been shown truths that predated the Imperium, that the fall of Cadia was not the end, only the unveiling. Cadia entered then, having waited just outside the chamber. "You should have told us sooner," she said, her tone controlled. Halbrecht's shoulders sagged. Would it have mattered? When faith fractures, words are only whispers against the storm. Vale stepped closer to the hololith. The manufactorum shimmered before him. The molten glow of forge fire pulsed from within like a beating heart. "He is there," Vale said. Halbrecht nodded, voice breaking. "Yes, and those who follow him believe suffering is a path to ascension. Pain is not deterrent, it is devotion." Vale closed his eyes. The whisper answered the thought before he could shape it. "You know this doctrine. You learned it in the fire. He speaks the same truth that saved you." Vale inhaled sharply through clenched teeth. Cadia stepped forward. "Look at me." He did. "You have been carrying this alone for too long." "There is no one I can give it to," he replied, voice low. "That is not true," she said, "but you must choose to believe it." For the first time since Cadia, he let someone else see the shame beneath certainty, the fear beneath command. He spoke softly. "He knows me." Cadia's expression did not change. "Then we face him together." Rennick re-entered then without knocking, his timing precise, unbroken by hesitation. "Lord Marshal, scouts report movement in the lower manufactorum tunnels. They are probing the sewer and plasma cooling conduits. They will attempt to bypass our defenses and strike from below." Vale's focus sharpened instantly. "Prepare sealed choke points and plasma vent traps. Deploy 2 squads to reinforce each of the subterranean corridors, and bring me the regimental Psyker cadre." Rennick blinked. "The Psykers, they are barely coherent after the rift surge. Many are unstable. That is why I want them," Vale said. "We are no longer fighting only flesh." Rennick hesitated, but nodded and left at once. Cadia studied Vale. "You are preparing to confront him?" "Yes." She stepped closer. "Not alone." He did not argue. The whisper spoke one final time, not as taunt, but as certainty. "When you face him, you face yourself." Vale did not deny it. Outside, the manufactorum fires glowed like a sunrise made of iron and blood, an omen of the battle yet to come. The manufactorum district loomed ahead like the skeleton of a dead god, its smokestacks jutting into the ashen sky like broken ribs. Even from a distance, the air shimmered with heat distortion and chemical fumes. The ground trembled at irregular intervals, metal plates shifting, furnaces roaring, engines cycling with slow, ominous rhythm. It felt alive, like something vast was breathing beneath the city. Vale stood at the forward staging perimeter, observing troop formations assembling with methodical precision. Lines of infantry checked weapons and reloaded power cells. Medici applied field dressings to those barely stable but unwilling to be left behind. Engineers offered binaric chants to soothe overheating plasma coils. No one spoke of victory. They spoke only of necessity. Rennick reported movements along the flanking sewer access tunnels, but Vale had already accounted for that. Gates were reinforced with layered barricades and crossfire platforms. If the enemy sought to bleed them through surprise, they would be met with disciplined killing corridors. Vale intended to shape the battlefield, not react to it. Cadia oversaw the regimental psychers brought forward under escort. Their eyes flickered with unstable fragments of light. Some pupils dilated wide, others shivering as if reflection trembled inside instead of out. Warp pressure had left its scars on them. One clutched his temples and whispered apologies to someone no one else could hear. Another traced circles in the air, as if drawing runes he alone recognized. Vale approached them slowly, knowing sudden movement could trigger collapse. "You will not be asked to see beyond what you can bear," he said. "You will only serve as anchor points, to sense what moves in the Manufactorum depths before it reaches us." One psyker looked up at him. Her face was pale, thin, lips cracked, but her voice was clear. "It's already here." The others flinched as if the words were a wound. Vale lowered to one knee in front of her, his expression unreadable. "Can you describe it?" She shook her head once. "Description is a lie. It is hunger that remembers." Her voice broke on the final word, and her hands clawed at her own throat before Cadia steadied her with calm, practiced touch. The whisper stirred, as though amused. "She speaks truth. I merely reach for what belongs to me." Vale kept his face still, but inside he felt something cold and sharp press close behind memory. The final moment on Cadia, where the sky had torn and something vast had reached toward him, not with malice, but with inevitability. The ground vibrated beneath their feet again, deeper this time. Something massive was shifting within the Manufactorum. Rennick joined them, helm under his arm. Scouts confirm heavy movement near the central forges. They're rallying for a push. Vale rose. "Then we move first." Rennick blinked, just once. "You mean to strike now?" "Yes." Vale stepped fully to the front, where the infantry waited. "We do not give them the chance to choose the battlefield. We take away the ground before they can claim it." Rennick nodded, something sharp and satisfied in his expression. "Then say the word." Vale lifted his sword. The bastion gates opened. The assault force advanced into the Manufactorum district. The city shifted as they entered it. Streets narrowed, buildings hunched closer, shadows lengthened. The air thickened with fumes that clung to armor joints and burned the lungs. Pipes overhead throbbed with boiling fluid. Shattered conveyor tracks jutted from the ground like rusted spines. Warning lights flickered in erratic rhythms, as though the entire sector were caught in a seizure. The further they marched, the quieter the soldiers became. Voices lowered to whispers, steps slowed. The Manufactorum did not merely look like a labyrinth, it felt like one. Space felt bent, corridors too narrow or too wide, angles distorted in ways that made the eyes ache to follow them. A soldier muttered prayers beneath his breath until the words choked. Cadia spoke softly to Vale as they walked. "This place is wrong." "Warp bleed," Vale said. "The rift above the city strains reality. The Manufactorum vents run deep enough to draw it through." Cadia nodded once. "And the preacher, they call him the voice of the Ascendant, he speaks to something that thrives in this distortion." "He speaks to me," the whisper murmured. Vale ignored it. He could feel eyes on them, not from windows or rooftops, but from the air itself. Watching, anticipating, the first attack came without sound. Shapes emerged from the haze. Heretic soldiers wearing industrial weld masks carved into symbols of swirling flame, their weapons cobbled from mining equipment and scrap metal. They struck from 3 directions at once, but Vale's forces were ready. Trenches of suppressive fire lit the streets. Grenades burst in tight arcs. Shields locked and lines held. Vale and Cadia moved together, a rhythm formed through countless battles. His blade met axes and rusted swords, cutting through metal and flesh alike. Cadia struck precisely, her movements purposeful, conserving energy for what she knew was coming, not this fight, but the one behind it. Rennick commanded the flanks, coordinating fire lanes with brutal efficiency. Whatever else he was no fool in war. But then, the enemy fell back too quickly, not routed, withdrawing. Cadia felt it first, a ripple in the air, like the intake of a great breath. Vale felt it next, pressure behind his ribcage, memory pulling tight. The manufactorum doors ahead opened. Heat poured out like a furnace exhalation. And he stepped forward. The preacher. He did not wear armor. He wore a worker's coat scorched by forge heat, hands scarred and blackened. His face was human, almost painfully so. Ordinary in the way that made him impossible to forget. His eyes glowed faintly, but not like demonic possession. More like someone who had seen something impossible and survived it. "Arcturus," he said, as though greeting a brother. Vale went still. Calia's hand tightened on her sword. Rennick froze for one heartbeat too long. The preacher stepped closer, unarmed, calm. "You remember," he said, "the moment, the offering, the hand extended in the fire, the choice you made when the sky burned." Vale did not speak. The whisper did. "You know him, because he is what you almost became." Cadia spoke first, voice slow, controlled. "You were with him on Cadia." The preacher smiled, not with triumph, but with sorrow. "Not with him, through him." He called out, and something answered. Vale's voice finally emerged, low and edged. "I chose survival." "You chose truth," the preacher replied, stepping closer. "You chose to reject a world of unanswered prayers and dead gods. You chose to see what lies beyond sacrifice without purpose." Vale's hand tightened on his sword. "You misunderstand," he said. "No," the preacher whispered. "You fear that I understand too well." The ground shook again, this time deeper, heavier, as if something beneath the manufactorum stirred in response to their exchange. Rennick raised his weapon. "Enough. Surrender or—" The preacher didn't look at him. He simply extended his hand slightly, not casting, not invoking, just inviting. And every heretic in sight dropped to their knees, not in worship, in expectancy. Vale's troops tensed. The preacher spoke softly, almost kindly. "Arcturus Vale, the hero of Cadia's fall, the one who survived when a world died. You know the Imperium will break. You know the Emperor will never answer. And yet you still carry the weight of the dead, as if you could keep the galaxy from collapsing with your hands alone." Silence wavered. Vale's voice came like iron drawn across stone. "I do not need answers. I need only stand where others fall." The preacher nodded slowly. "Yes, and that is why the galaxy will follow you when it burns." The whisper did not taunt now. It simply waited. The preacher lowered his voice, gentle, intimate, unhurried. "You opened the door on Cadia. You asked for salvation. I only answered." Cadia stepped forward. "No more." The preacher met her gaze. Not hostile, not mocking. Almost sorry. "You cannot save him from what he already is." Vale struck first. Steel met air, and the manufactorum trembled like something waking beneath them. Vale's blade cut through the air with a precision born of necessity, not rage. The preacher didn't move to defend himself. Instead, he stepped aside with uncanny calm, the strike passing close enough to disturb the scorched cloth of his coat. The ground trembled again, as though steel girders deep beneath the manufactorum strained against their foundations. The soldiers behind Veil tightened their formation, weapons raised, breath held. The preacher's voice remained steady. You act because you fear what will happen if you listen. That is wisdom and cowardice together. Veil advanced with measured steps, each footfall controlled, deliberate. Cadia moved with him, her blade angled low, watching not the preacher's body, but the slight movements of his shoulders, his breathing, the subtle tells that precede intent. Rennick's squad spread to encircle, rifles trained, forming a tightening ring. The preacher finally raised his hands, but not in surrender. Rather, he held them open, palms outward, as though inviting a dialogue. Arcturus, what you carry is not guilt, he said. It is grief. You grieve the world that died, the loyalty that shattered, the faith that was proven hollow. And you grieve the part of yourself you left buried beneath Cadia's ruins. Veil's expression did not change. Do not speak as though you know me. But I do. The preacher's eyes softened, a sadness deepening in them. Because I was there. I saw what reached for you when the sky split. I saw the truth that revealed itself in fire. You did not beg for survival. You begged for your soldiers to live, for them, not yourself. A murmur passed through the Psycho cadre, tormented, strained. One clasped her head, whispering, "He is still there, the one who called, the one who answered." Cadia glanced toward the Psychers, then back to the preacher, seeing the lines forming, the web tightening. You speak of salvation through surrender, she said, but what you offer is annihilation of the self. The preacher turned toward her, and the respect in his gaze was genuine. You fear that if Arcturus accepts what waits within him, you will lose him. Your loyalty is admirable, but your fear blinds you. Cadia stepped forward, blade rising. He is not yours to define. Nor yours, the preacher replied. The ground shook more violently, a deep, resonant pulse that sent dust falling from overhead gantries and fractured steel supports. The manufactorum's furnaces roared louder, as if whatever stirred below was rising toward the surface. Veil did not allow himself to be drawn into the preacher's cadence. He advanced again, faster this time. The preacher moved backward, footsteps light, as if guided by some silent rhythm. You think I brought corruption, he said, but I brought clarity. I revealed that the Emperor has abandoned humanity to its suffering. You know this. You felt his silence when Cadia burned. Veil struck. The preacher parried with nothing. No weapon, only movement, turning the blow aside by inches. The force of the strike cracked the pavement beneath them. Veil's voice came low, controlled, cut from iron. Silence is not absence. Duty does not depend on hearing an answer. The preacher smiled, not mocking, but aching. And yet you heard an answer, not from him, but from the rift. The whisper returned then, not soft, not coaxing, but close, immediate, as though it stood directly behind Veil. I did not replace him. I filled the space where he refused to stand. Veil's jaw locked, his grip tightened. The power field along his blade flared brighter. Cadia saw it, the tension, the strain, the fault line where belief and doubt collided inside him. And she stepped into the space between the preacher and Veil. No more words, she said. It was not anger. It was a boundary. The preacher studied her for a moment, then bowed his head slightly, as though acknowledging a worthy opponent, not in war, but in will. Then see, he said. He spread his arms. The manufactorum roared. Heat surged through the ground. vents bursting open, sending gouts of flame into the air. The metal beneath their feet vibrated as an engine deeper than any industrial furnace roared awake. Heretic forces surged forward from concealed alcoves, chanting in rhythmic unison. Not chaotic screams, but structured, disciplined invocation. Rennick yelled orders. Shields front, form firing arcs, stabilize the line. The soldiers moved instantly. The disciplined formation they drilled under veil held firm even in the face of sudden chaos. Lasfire tore into charging heretics. Grenades arced overhead. The first wave crashed against unmoving shields. Veil, Cadia, and the preacher stood at the center of the storm. And Veil, for the first time, felt the shape of what stirred beneath the manufactorum. It was not a demon, not fully. It was something suspended between worlds, something born of belief and desperation, and the psychic echo of a dying planet's last cry. The preacher's voice rose, not as sermon, but as revelation. When Cadia fell, 1,000 million souls cried out in a single moment. That death scream did not vanish. It took shape. It became a question. He turned his eyes to Veil. And you, Arcturus Veil, were the first to answer it. The whisper spoke, not as one voice, but as countless overlapping murmurs, as though every soul that died on Cadia now exhaled through him. You called to live, and I answered. Veil felt his breath catch, not with horror, but with recognition. He had asked, not to be saved, not for mercy. He had begged the void to let him save others, and something had answered. Cadia stepped closer to him, grounding him. Whatever answer does not define you. Your choice now does. Rennick cut down a heretic and shouted, "We cannot hold much longer. We must fall back to secondary positions or we will be overrun." The preacher looked at Veil, not demanding, not pleading, expecting. "This is the moment Cadia lives or dies in you," he said softly. "Not in memory, in choice." The manufactorum floor cracked. Flames trembled. The whisper spoke clearly now, singular, focused. "Let me in, and I will save them. All of them. No more worlds burning. No more failure. No more loss." Veil's heart hammered. He saw Cadia's final moment. The sky tearing open. The fortress collapsing. The soldiers looking to him. Not for orders, for hope. He saw Kyrithel now, burning, breaking, looking to him again. He closed his eyes. The battlefield noise fell away. Only one voice remained. Cadia's. Arcturus. He opened his eyes, and he chose. His sword came up, not toward the preacher, but toward the heretics closing around his soldiers. He turned, raising his voice over the rising roar of engines and flames. "We hold," he shouted, the words cutting through fear, through doubt, through the whisper itself. "As Cadia held, as we hold now, as we will hold until our last breath." The preacher exhaled, a long, slow breath of something like sorrow. "So be it," he whispered. The manufactorum answered. The ground split, and something began to rise. The ground buckled with a deep bone-drawn groan, like the city itself was waking from a nightmare it had never escaped. Plates of ferrocrete split apart in jagged lines, pipes burst into scalding geysers of steam, and molten slag bled upward through cracks like blood from an old wound being pressed open. The manufactorum's furnaces roared to full flame, lighting the sky in a hellish orange glare that cast every shadow into something stretched and monstrous. Soldiers stumbled as the earth lurched, formations briefly breaking before commanders shouted them back into place. Veil steadied himself, planting his boots against the trembling steel. Cadia was already braced beside him, her sword angled defensively, eyes locked on the widening rupture in the ground. Her face remained disciplined, but her breath was tightly controlled, as if she felt the same invisible weight pressing down from above. The preacher did not move. He stood at the very edge of the fracture, arms lowered, palms open toward the heat rising from the depths. It was as though he were greeting something he had always known would return. Rennick approached, helm sealed, voice hard through the Vox grill. "Lord Marshal, we must withdraw. If the ground collapses beneath us..." "No withdrawal," Vale said, voice cold and steady. "If we break now, the manufactorum will consume the city. We hold here." Rennick hesitated only a moment, then nodded and relayed the order. Soldiers formed a new perimeter, shields raised, rifles steady despite the trembling beneath their feet. They did not shout war cries. They did not roar defiance. They simply stood, breath steady, eyes forward. The crack widened, heat surged, and something began to rise. At first it was only machinery, twisting elevator chains, dented armor plates, furnace girders fused together in shapes that should not have held weight yet did. It looked like a titan that had been melted and reformed by a blacksmith, driven half-mad by grief. The construct's frame was industrial, but its shape suggested something vaguely human. 4 immense arms, each ending in talons of grinding saws and pistons. Gears whirred inside its chest like a beating mechanical heart, pulsing with red furnace light. It stepped forward, and the ground shook with every movement. But it was not the machine alone that chilled the air. It was the thing bound within it. Through gaps in the plating, through shattered view grills and furnace vents, a shape pulsed like molten flesh, glowing veins twisting in spirals, patterns that were not random but written, carved, engraved with meaning older than the Imperium. The light within the machine pulsed with rhythm, slow, steady, like breathing. Cadia whispered, without realizing the word had escaped her lips. A binding. Vale heard it too, the psychic echo of it, like a heartbeat he recognized, not from memory, from shared grief. Something of Cadia lived inside that machine. The preacher lifted his hand toward the rising monstrosity. His voice was gentle, reverent. When Cadia died, it left behind a sorrow deep enough to shape reality. A world does not fall quietly, Arcturus. The screams of a billion souls tore a hole in the veil, and from that crucible, something was born. Not demon, not warp fiend, not corruption. He looked at Vale, his eyes luminous, with something raw, human, unfiltered. A witness. Vale's grip tightened around his sword. He did not speak, but the whisper within him shifted, closer, warmer, not urging, not pressing, simply present. It is the echo of the dying, the last voice of a world that would not be forgotten. You know it, because you heard it, because you answered it. The machine took another step forward, steam and smoke hissing from its joints. Soldiers faltered, not retreating but bracing, horror threading through discipline. Yet the thing did not rush, it did not roar, it simply watched. Rennick drew closer to Vale. "What in the Emperor's name is that?" Vale answered without turning his head. Grief made manifest. Rennick recoiled slightly, unsettled not by the words, but by Vale's certainty. The preacher continued, voice calm as a voice in a chapel, speaking to those who wish to be absolved. "This is not damnation. It is memory that refuses to die. A world begging to be carried. A pain you have already taken into yourself. You do not fear this creature, Arcturus. You fear that you are the same as it." Vale finally turned his gaze fully to the preacher. "You speak of me as if I am already lost." The preacher took a breath, not triumphant, not eager, but mournful. "You are not lost. You are chosen. You survived because grief recognized itself in you." Cadia stepped between them, voice sharp and clear. Grief is not destiny. Grief is not truth. Grief is something to be borne, not worshipped. The preacher's sorrow deepened. And how long have you carried your own grief, sister? How long have you watched those you guided die in your arms? Does faith fill the empty spaces? Or did you simply learn to live among the cracks? Cadia did not flinch, but her silence was heavy. Vale saw it, felt it, the fault lines forming in all of them. Rennick's impatience tightened into anger. We cannot stand here debating philosophy with a madman while that thing gathers power. We must strike. Vale did not respond immediately. He studied the machine creature, the slow breathing of light, the faint psychic resonance pulsing outward. It was not hostile. Not yet. It was waiting for him, because it recognized him, because it remembered him, because the last breaths of Cadia had passed through him as they passed into death. Vale took one step forward. The whisper did not speak now. It listened. The preacher spoke quietly. You can turn away. You can continue to carry the dead as weight, or you can carry them as strength. Let the world that died become the foundation of the world you build. Cadia reached for Vale, her voice low, urgent, trembling not from fear, but from something far more painful. Do not let grief tell you who you must become. The preacher spoke at the same moment, voice soft as breath on the back of Vale's throat. Do not let denial bury who you already are. The machine creature lowered its massive furnace-lit head, not in threat, in recognition. Vale closed his eyes. He saw Cadia burning. He saw Carythal standing on the edge of the same fate. He saw soldiers looking to him, not for salvation, but for direction. He breathed in. He breathed out. And then he raised his sword, not toward the machine, not toward the preacher, but toward the sky, where the cicatrix maledictum split, the night like a wound that would never heal. His voice rang through the manufactorum, through smoke, flame, steel, and fear. We do not bow to death, not the death of worlds, not the death of hope, not the death of memory. We carry our dead. We do not become them. The creature froze. The preacher's expression wavered, pain cutting through the calm. Cadia stood beside Vale. Rennick raised his weapon, and the battle for the manufactorum truly began. The manufactorum erupted into movement, the great construct shifting its immense weight with a resonance that reverberated down to marrow. The ground shuddered beneath every step it took, steam venting in columns as molten metal coursed through its arteries like blood. The air shook with the drone of machinery trying to imitate the rhythm of life, a heartbeat forged in pain. Vale lowered his sword from the sky and pointed it toward the advancing mass. The signal was understood without a single shouted command. The Imperial lines surged forward, shields locking into phalanx formation, while heavy weapons teams found their angles. The psychers behind them steadied one another, forming a trembling chain of wills against the psychic pressure radiating from the creature. The preacher did not move. He simply watched, his expression filled not with triumph nor malice, but with a sorrow so complete it felt like it did not belong to just one man. Do not make the same mistake twice, he murmured. Vale did not answer. He advanced. The first volley struck the creature, plasma bolts searing into its exposed cabling, las fire peppering its armor. The machine staggered but did not fall. It turned its head slowly, as though the act was not natural, and focused on the Imperial ranks. The furnace light pulsed within its core, brightening, quickening, matching the tempo of something awakening deeper inside. Then it moved. The ground shook as one of its massive arms swung outward, a piston-driven claw cleaving into the front line. Shields shattered, bodies broke. The force threw soldiers across the courtyard like discarded fragments. Blood sprayed across metal plating, sizzling when it touched the heated machinery. But the line did not collapse. Rennick was there, bellowing orders through the Vox grill, repositioning troops in the space of heartbeats. Heavy guns to the flanks. Fire on joint articulation points. Do not let it gain full momentum. The psychers tensed as they felt the psychic surge from within the creature. One screamed, dropping to his knees as visions flooded his mind, of a world breaking apart, stone foundations splintering beneath cataclysmic warp fire, soldiers screaming beneath collapsing fortresses. Cadia. Vale felt it too, like a scar reopening, but he forced himself forward, blade raised. Cadia was beside him, every step aligned, her breathing steady despite the storm raging around them. The preacher called across the battlefield, not shouting, simply speaking, yet his voice carried through the roar. Arcturus, it does not want to kill you. It wants to be known. Vale leapt toward the creature's leg, power blade driving into the gap between moving plates. Sparks exploded outward, molten metal splashing as he wrenched the blade downward, carving a line of severed conduits. The machine roared, not with pain, but with pressure release, steam blasting outward, cloaking Vale in scalding heat. He staggered back, but did not fall. The creature swung its other arm, and Cadia moved faster than thought, slamming her shield into Vale and pushing him clear. The claw crashed into the metal ground where he had stood, splintering the flooring and sending fragments flying like shrapnel. Vale hit the ground, rolled, and rose to his feet. He looked back at Cadia. She was still standing, though blood streaked her cheek, where a shard had grazed her. Their eyes met, communicating more in a heartbeat than words could sustain. They moved together again. Rennick's heavy teams opened fire, focused volleys striking the creature's knee joints, forcing it to shift weight. Steam poured from vents. Its furnace heart flickered, dimmed, then brightened again. The preacher watched, hands at his sides. It remembers the fall, he said quietly. It remembers the last breath of a dying world. The soldiers who did not run. The men who held the line against the impossible. It remembers you, Arcturus. You were there when it was born. Vale felt the whisper rise. Not urging, not pleading, just present. You are not separate from it. You are the echo of the same moment. He struck again. The creature reeled, but something changed. The psychers trembled as one. Their eyes rolled back. Their voices merged in a single breaking whisper. It recognizes him. It calls his name. Cadia's breath hitched, not fear, but realization. Arcturus, she murmured, it is drawn to you, to your grief, to the moment you asked to save them. Vale froze for a fraction of a second. The creature's furnace light pulsed, slow, steady, like a heartbeat sinking to his own. The preacher stepped forward, not into battle, but into understanding. You do not need to fight it. You need to accept what you carry. Grief is not weakness. It is the proof that you loved, that you cared, that you tried. Vale's jaw tightened, a tremor running through him. He remembered every soldier he had lost, every voice that had called his name, every hand that had reached for him as Cadia fell, every promise he could not keep. How many times, the preacher whispered, have you woken remembering the sound of their final cries? Vale's breath caught. Cadia stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. You do not have to face this alone. The preacher closed his eyes. But he did. That is why the grief found him. Vale's vision blurred, not externally, but inwardly, as if the line between memory and present had thinned to transparency. He saw the creature not as metal and furnace light, but as a mass of souls, bound by a single echoing scream that had never ended. Cadia. Just before the creature struck again, Vale lowered his sword. The battlefield inhaled. Rennick shouted in disbelief, "Lord Marshal, you cannot—" Cadia did not speak. She simply stayed beside him. The creature halted mid-motion. Its massive claw hovered inches from Vale's chest. The preacher's voice was barely a whisper. "Do not reject your grief. Honor it. Name it." Vale exhaled, a shuddering breath that shook him to the core. He spoke. "We remember, Cadia." The creature froze. The furnace heart flickered. The psychers gasped, clutching their chests. The whisper murmured, not triumphant, quiet, soft, aching. "Yes." Cadia's hand tightened around his arm. Rennick stared, caught between awe and fury. The preacher lowered his head, and the construct of grief, born from the death scream of a world, leaned forward, its enormous head lowered as though bowing. But the manufactorum did not still. Something deeper stirred. In saving one memory, Vale had awakened another, a darker one. The preacher's eyes lifted, not victorious, but forewarned. This is only the beginning. The ground shook again, harder, deeper, like something beneath the creature had woken. Vale raised his sword once more. Not in denial, not in fear, but in readiness. The war was far from over. The manufactorum floor split open wider, the tremor rolling through the structure like thunder travelling through hollow bones. Molten slag poured into fissures that stretched outward in veins of light, feeding something below. The air thickened, trembling with pressure, as if the atmosphere itself resisted what was about to emerge. Vale stood his ground, the aftershock of his words still hanging in the heat. "We remember, Cadia." The construct before him remained bowed, the furnace heart pulsing in slow sync with his breath, as though connected by unseen current. Rennick's voice cracked through the noise. "Lord Marshal, the readings, something's rising beneath it. Whatever you did, it's not stopping." Vale didn't look back. It was never meant to stop. His voice was quiet, calm, almost reverent. "This was the wound, Rennick, the one Cadia left behind." The ground convulsed again, violently enough to knock soldiers from their feet. Sparks erupted from the ceiling as conduits burst, cascading fire and molten fragments across the chamber. Cadia steadied herself beside Vale, raising her shield to block falling debris. "Arcturus," she said, tone clipped but controlled. "If you can reach it, you must do it now. Whatever is below will consume everything." He nodded once. The preacher stood across the breach, his robe scorched, the glow of the furnaces painting his face in alternating light and shadow. "You've touched the truth," he said softly, "but you haven't accepted it. There's more, buried beneath that grief. Beneath Cadia's fall lies something far older, something that's waited to be remembered." Vale's gaze sharpened. "What are you talking about?" "The first sin," the preacher replied, "the one the Imperium buried before it ever rose." The whisper stirred in Vale's mind like a shiver running through the soul. He is not wrong. The words were not cruel this time, only certain. What you feel is not corruption. It is memory awakening, the pain of all that has been forgotten. Vale forced the voice down. He turned to his soldiers, their faces ghost-lit by the pulsing red of the forge fire. "Hold your lines," he ordered. "No one breaks formation." But even as he spoke, the manufactorum groaned deeper. The machine creature shuddered, its metal skin cracking as molten fissures spread up its limbs. The glow inside shifted from steady red to a chaotic storm of orange and violet. It tilted its head as though listening to something far below. Then, without warning, it reached down, claws sinking into the ground, and began to tear the metal apart. Rennick fired a flare toward the creature's chest, the plasma bolt exploding uselessly against its armor. "It's digging," he shouted. "For throne's sake, it's digging something out." Cadia glanced at Vale. Whatever this is, it's not just grief anymore. Vale stepped forward, feeling the heat scald against his armor. He shouted above the roaring metal, "Preacher, stop this. If it breaks containment, the entire sector will burn." The preacher's expression was distant, half in awe, half in despair. "You can't contain what was born from despair, Lord Marshal. This is not destruction. It's remembrance. The galaxy forgets its sins. The warp remembers them." With a deafening crack, the ground beneath the creature collapsed. A column of searing light burst upward, so bright it burned after images across every retina. The shockwave sent soldiers sprawling. Cadia shielded Vale instinctively, her armor blackening under the heat. Rennick was thrown to one knee, swearing through clenched teeth as the air screamed. When the glare dimmed, they saw it. The creature still knelt, but beneath it, something vast and unseen had awakened. The light that spilled upward was not uniform. It flickered in patterns, forming symbols in the air, runes older than Imperial record, older than Cadia itself. They rotated slowly, weaving through smoke and heat, their glow pulsing in rhythm with the creature's furnace heart. The whisper in Vale's mind deepened until it became many voices at once, layered, overlapping, human and inhuman. The first wall that fell was not Cadia. The first lie was not chaos. It was silence. Vale staggered back. He clutched the railing beside him, breath shallow. "What are you?" he muttered, though he knew the answer wouldn't bring comfort. "We are what remains when the faithful stop believing. We are the echo of the vow that was never kept." The preacher's eyes reflected the flickering symbols. "Do you see now, Arcturus? It is not the enemy that destroys empires. It is the grief they refuse to name. This thing, the memory of loss itself. It is the Emperor's first failure, born again through you." Cadia stepped in front of Vale, raising her blade. "Enough," she said, her voice steel. "You speak of faith and failure as though they are the same. They are not." The preacher turned his gaze to her. "You believe that because you still hope. Hope is the last lie faith tells before it dies." Rennick's voice cut through the tension, raw and furious. "This is madness. We're standing on a collapsing reactor. Either we retreat or die debating philosophy with a lunatic." Vale's voice cut through his, colder than steel. "No one leaves." He looked past the preacher, past the machine, into the light rising from the breach. "If this is Cadia's echo, then it ends with me." He took a step forward. The whisper hesitated. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. "You would destroy what you created." "I didn't create it," Vale said quietly. "I carried it." He lifted his sword, the power field igniting in white-blue brilliance. Cadia was beside him instantly, shield raised. Rennick shouted for the troops to cover them, and lines reformed, trembling but unbroken. Vale advanced toward the machine. The air thickened with psychic pressure. Every breath was a fight. The creature's gaze lowered to meet his, glowing with the dull understanding of something that had learned what pain was and wished it could forget. Vale stopped just short of its reach. He raised his blade. "This is not your burden to bear," he said. "You are not Cadia. You are its grief." The preacher's voice broke, almost pleading. "You can't kill memory." "I'm not killing it," Vale said, and his voice softened to something almost human. I'm letting it rest. He drove the blade forward. The instant the sword pierced the furnace core, the world erupted. Light surged through the manufactorum, spilling into every corridor and vent. Soldiers shielded their eyes as the machine shuddered, collapsing inward. The preacher screamed, not in pain, but in grief so profound, it felt like the world itself mourned. Vale felt the whisper rise one last time, wrapping around him like smoke. You could have ruled them all. He exhaled, whispering back, then let someone better carry what's left. The furnace heart exploded in silence. No sound, only light. The shockwave rolled outward, consuming everything in blinding radiance. And when it faded, the manufactorum stood in ruin. The machine was gone. The runes had vanished. Only the faint hiss of cooling metal remained. Cadia was on her knees beside him, helmet cracked, armor scorched. She looked up at Vale, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and relief. It's over. He didn't answer, immediately. He looked toward the breach, now sealed by molten stone. No, he said softly, it's never over. The preacher was gone. Only his voice lingered in the echoes. Every empire ends with a prayer unanswered. Vale turned from the silence, his soldiers gathering behind him, battered but alive. Fall back to the bastion, he ordered quietly. We hold what remains. And with that, Arcturus Vale walked into the dim light of a world that no longer knew what it was fighting for. Only that it still must. The return to the bastion was not triumph nor defeat. It was a procession of survivors crossing ground that no longer felt like part of the same world. The manufactorum district still glowed behind them in a dull, molten haze, as though the earth had been cauterized instead of healed. Smoke drifted in slow, languid veils, obscuring the sky and the scar of the rift above. No heretic pursued them. No engines roared in renewed attack. Silence followed them back, deep, unnatural, deliberate. The silence was not peace. It was aftermath. Vale walked at the front of the column. His armor still radiated faint heat from the furnace shockwave. His sword hung at his side, its power field extinguished. The metal darkened along one edge from contact with something that should not have been able to burn it. Cadia matched his pace, though exhaustion sat on her shoulders like a weight. There was a scrape across her shield where molten slag had cooled, the metal permanently fused into uneven ridges. She did not ask if he was all right. She already knew that whatever he carried could not be answered with a word. Behind them, Rennick moved through the ranks, reforming squads, directing Medicae to the worst wounded. His voice was steady, commanding, not a tone of compassion, but of structure, the reinforcement of order after chaos. The soldiers followed, limping, leaning on each other when needed, their boots striking the stone roads like the slow tolling of a morning bell. When the bastion walls came into view, its banners tattered but still raised. Some of the soldiers exhaled like men stepping out of deep water. Others wept, soft, restrained, the kind of tears that came not from grief alone, but from a relief so fragile it was almost painful. The gates opened, and the defenders who had remained behind saw the returning column. Their eyes widened, not in disbelief, but in a quiet, reverent recognition of what had been endured. No cheers rose, no hymns were sung, but every soldier who could still stand moved to meet those who returned. Hands clasped forearms, helms bowed, the exchange of survivors acknowledging survivors. Inside the bastion hall, the wounded were laid in rows. Medicae worked without pause, voices low, movements practiced. The air was thick with antiseptic blood and quiet prayer. Vale moved through them, listening, not to the words themselves, but to the way they were spoken. Some prayed to the Emperor, some to memory, some did not pray at all. He felt each one. At the far side of the hall, Cadia stopped him with a touch to his arm. "Rest," she said. The word was not request or command. It was concern, plain and unadorned. "I can't," Vale replied. His voice was quiet, not defiant. "If I stop, it will come back stronger." Cadia's expression tightened. She did not ask what it was. She had already heard enough to understand. Rennick arrived then, helm off, sweat plastered along his brow, expression hard. "The manufactorum is quiet," he said. "Too quiet. The heretics have withdrawn completely. No counterstrike, no rally, nothing." Vale nodded slowly. The construct was their anchor. Once it fell, their purpose fractured. "Then we should pursue," Rennick pressed. "Crush what remains before they regroup. The city is within our grasp." Cadia turned her head toward him. "We can barely hold the bastion. Half our forces can't stand. The other half haven't slept in 90 hours. Rennick's jaw tightened. Victory requires cost. Vale looked at him then, really looked. The ambition, the hunger, and beneath it, something else. Fear, not of losing the battle, but of losing momentum, of losing meaning in the war. "No," Vale said. "We consolidate, we fortify, we make the city ours before we push beyond it." Rennick stared for a heartbeat, something cold sparking behind his eyes. Then he saluted and stepped away to relay the command. His stride was sharp, efficient, controlled, but not aligned, not anymore. Cadia let out a slow breath. "He is slipping from you," she said. Vale looked out across the wounded hall. "He was never with me, only with the war. The two are not the same." "No," Vale murmured, "they are not." He walked onward. As dusk fell beyond the fractured windows, Vale stood at the ramparts once more. The city lights flickered weakly below, like dying embers. The rift overhead pulsed faintly, a reminder that the galaxy above was no longer kind, nor stable, nor anything that could be depended on except for its hunger. The whisper had been silent since the collapse, too silent. He waited for it, not wishing for it, but bracing for the moment it returned. And when it did, it came softly. "You think the grief is gone because you named it, but grief is not a single wound. It is a door. You opened it, and now everything behind it will come." Vale didn't move. He did not clench his fists. He let the whisper speak, because silence would not deny its truth. This was only one echo. There are countless worlds that died unheard, countless screams buried beneath history. The galaxy is full of grief waiting to be born. Vale closed his eyes. "Then I will answer each of them as I did this one. I will not let them rule me." The whisper's tone changed then. Not mocking, not triumphant, something like pity. "You cannot carry them all." Cadia stepped beside him, her presence grounding. She didn't ask what he heard. She didn't need to. She followed his gaze toward the manufactorum ruins. "What rises next?" she asked quietly. Vale exhaled. "Doubt," he said. "Not mine. Theirs." And at that moment, as if summoned by the word, shouts rose from the courtyard below. Not alarms, not warnings. Argument. Rennick stood at the center of a growing circle of soldiers, some injured, some still armed, all listening. His voice rang clear in the hollowed space of the bastion. "We fought for nothing," he was saying. "We bled for a city that still burns. We followed a commander who listens to voices none of us hear." Cadia's breath caught. Veil's didn't. This was inevitable. Rennick turned toward the gathered forces, eyes bright with conviction and something breaking loose beneath it. Arctura's veil is not leading us to victory. He is leading us to follow ghosts, to chase grief, to fight shadows. We need a commander for the living, not the dead. Soldiers shifted, some uncertain, some convinced, some angry. Veil descended the steps slowly, not rushing, not looming, only arriving. Rennick saw him and did not stop. He pointed. There, that man, the one we followed from Cadia. He brought something back with him, something wrong, something that whispers to him in the dark. Cadia stepped forward, but Veil lifted a hand to stop her. He faced Rennick. He did not raise his voice. You are afraid, Veil said gently. Rennick froze, rage flickering into something raw. Veil continued, his tone calm, steady, unyielding. You are afraid that everything we lost meant nothing, that all we are now is what remains after our faith collapsed. You want meaning that does not hurt to carry. Rennick's jaw trembled. Veil stepped closer, until only a few paces separated them. But I cannot give you meaning without grief. No one can. Cadia fell. The Imperium is breaking. The galaxy burns. We do not get to choose the world we inherit. He looked into the eyes of every soldier gathered, but we choose what we do while we stand in it. Silence, not empty, charged. Rennick's voice came out broken, not shouting now but pleading. Then tell me what we are fighting for. Tell me what remains. Veil gave the answer he had refused himself until now. Each other. Rennick's shoulders dropped. The fight went out of him. Not because he was defeated, but because something in him had finally heard the thing he had been denying. The bastion held its breath. The whisper did not speak. Not now. The night outside was deep and full of waiting, but inside the walls, for the first time since Cadia fell, there was no silence, only belonging. Night settled over Kyrithel with a heaviness that did not disperse, even as the manufactorum fires dimmed and the wounded bastion quieted into murmured breaths. The soldiers slept where they could, against stone walls, on ration crates, beside each other, not because they felt safe, but because exhaustion outweighed terror. Even the air seemed to rest, though beneath its stillness lived a tension like a held breath. The city was not won. It was paused. Veil remained awake. He stood atop the ramparts, armor unfastened at the collar, breath steaming in the cooling air. The rift overhead flickered like torn cloth lit from behind. A single wound stretched across the galaxy. He looked at that wound without fear, but not without weariness. The whisper had not returned since the manufactorum collapsed. He did not mistake that for absence. Silence was simply another form of approach. Footsteps approached, slow, measured, intentional. Rennick. There was no anger in his steps, no hesitation. When he reached Veil's side, he stood with a soldier's rigid posture, but the edge of defiance that once clung to him had softened, replaced by something harder to identify. Not loyalty, reflection. I spoke out of fear, Rennick said quietly. His voice, for the first time, was not sharpened to slice. I believed the war needed sternness, certainty, command that does not crack. He paused. But I saw you stand before that thing, and you did not break. You could have, and no man here would have blamed you. But you didn't. Veil did not look at him. I did break, he said. I simply did not remain broken. Rennick breathed in slowly. We could still pursue. Take the manufactorum territory while they are scattered. Strike before they recover. We will, Veil answered, but not yet. Rennick nodded once. It was not surrender. It was trust. Quiet, cautious, earned not through speech, but through witness. He remained beside Vale a moment longer, then returned to his duties without needing dismissal. Cadia approached next, but not out of obligation. She simply arrived where she was needed. "Your decision was the right one," she said. He did not answer immediately. "Was it?" Vale asked. "We left the manufactorum standing. The preacher is still alive. The heretics remain somewhere inside that maze of steel." Cadia leaned her back against the rampart beside him. "You did not strike to win the battle. You struck to prevent something worse. The construct was not the enemy. It was what the enemy used." Vale's jaw tightened. "I destroyed something that was suffering." Cadia looked at him then, a gaze that did not accuse, did not console, only saw. "You freed it," she corrected. "There is a difference." Silence settled, not heavy, but stable. A quiet in which breathing could be heard and counted. Below them, soldiers gathered around low burning fires. Some sharpened blades, some cleaned weapons, some simply stared into the flames, thinking of worlds left behind. The psychers had been moved to the inner sanctum, kept under watch, not out of distrust, but protection. They had touched something vast. No mind emerged from that unchanged. The whisper waited, not speaking, watching, patient. Cadia's voice broke the quiet. "Something has changed in you." "Yes," Vale admitted. "Does it frighten you?" Vale exhaled. "It should. But it doesn't." "No." Cadia nodded once, a motion that conveyed far more than words could. Understanding, recognition, acceptance. Vale let his eyes close. For the first time since Cadia, he allowed himself to feel tired. Not broken, not undone, just tired. But the peace did not last. A klaxon sounded sharply from the bastion's inner watchtower. 3 short blasts, 1 long. Not alarm, not attack, summons. Vale straightened. He moved through the bastion hall swiftly, Cadia at his side. Soldiers stepped aside, not with ceremonial strictness, but with the instinctive shift of those who recognize momentum. The inner war room doors opened. Inside, Governor Halbrecht stood pale-faced beside a hololithic projection. Rennick was already there, fists braced against the table edge. The projection flickered, static-ridden, but unmistakable. An Imperial ship beacon, a cruiser, approaching Kyrithil, not enemy, Imperial, but broken. Its signal flickered with distress markers. Hull breach, engine instability, life support failing. Rennick straightened. "Reinforcements," he said, though the word did not ring with certainty. Cadia's gaze tightened. "Or refugees?" Vale stepped closer. The signal identification code cycled across the hololith. He knew it instantly. He had fought beside that ship. Its name burned across the display like memory resurfacing. Vigil in ashes. A Cadian command vessel. One of the last that escaped the fall. Vale's voice, when it came, was steady. "Open long-range Vox. Priority channel. I will speak to them directly." The Vox array crackled with heavy distortion. Warp interference hissed through the signal like breathing. Then, faint, broken, raw. "Vale, is that you?" The voice was ragged, frayed, but recognizable. Colonel Lysa Serin, one of the last commanders who stood with him on Cadia's final line. A woman who had watched the pylons collapse, who had covered the retreat of the last evac transports, who had sworn she would die before letting hope fail. Her voice now sounded tired in a way no wound could cause. "We are coming in, but the ship won't hold. We need landing clearance. Survivors, hundreds, wounded, children." Vale's chest tightened, Not grief, not guilt. Recognition. He pressed the Vox key. "You are clear to approach. We are with you." Silence answered for 3 long seconds. Then, soft, relieved. "I knew you would still be standing." The transmission cut out. Rennick exhaled, half laugh, half disbelief. More survivors, more troops. This changes everything. Cadia, however, did not look relieved. She looked wary. Vale understood why. Survivors meant hope, but survivors from Cadia meant memory, and memory was not at rest. Vale spoke quietly. "Prepare a landing corridor. Clear the courtyard. Medici teams on standby." Rennick moved instantly to carry out the orders. Cadia turned to Vale. "If the preacher remains in the manufactorum, he will not let this go unanswered." "No," Vale agreed. "He won't." The whisper returned then, not as temptation, not as warning, but as prophecy. When memory returns, so too will the choice. Vale felt the truth of it settle through him like falling ash. He did not run from it. He walked toward the courtyard, where soon survivors would land, bringing with them stories, wounds, truths, and ghosts. And somewhere across the city, in the shadowed heat of the manufactorum's depths, the preacher opened his eyes. He whispered a name, not to summon, to welcome. Arcturus. The war was no longer about territory. It was about what a man becomes when the past refuses to stay buried. And dawn would bring no peace, only revelation. The following dawn came with no sunlight, only a pale, bruised glow that spread weakly through the haze above Kirithil. The smoke from the manufactorum still hung thick across the horizon, veiling the city in a restless half-light. On the bastion's upper decks, sirens pulsed low and rhythmic, the signal for incoming descent. The Vigil in ashes was approaching orbit, her engines crippled, her hull torn, yet she came on like a wounded animal too stubborn to die. Vale stood on the command balcony overlooking the landing field. The wind that swept across the cracked tiles carried the sour tang of oil, smoke, and ozone. Behind him, Cadia and Rennick waited, one silent, one restless. In the sky above, a faint shimmer marked the descending ship, a scar of fire slicing through the grey clouds. The Vox relays flickered with static bursts, snatches of strained communication. Each word that came through was half a memory, half a warning. Engines failing, vector unstable, atmospheric breach. Vale's eyes narrowed. "Stabilizers?" he asked. "Non-responsive," Cadia said, studying the incoming telemetry. "The pilot's compensating manually." Rennick frowned. "They won't make the field. Not at that angle." Vale didn't move. His voice, when it came, was calm. "They will. She's flown through worse." A low roar filled the air as the Vigil in ashes broke through the final cloud layer. Her silhouette emerged, massive, limping, one side scorched black from re-entry. Whole sections of her plating had been blown open, exposing the skeletal ribbing beneath. Engines sputtered, coughing blue flame in uneven rhythm. She tilted dangerously, her approach path dragging low over the ruins beyond the city walls. Vale's knuckles tightened on the railing. Brace for impact. The ship hit hard. A wave of dust and debris rolled outward as its lower hull skidded across the landing plane, tearing through old ferrocrete. The noise was thunder drawn out for minutes, a long metallic scream that ended in a final, grinding shudder. Then silence, broken only by the hissing of ruptured vents and the distant crackle of flame. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Vale said, "Medicae teams, now." Soldiers surged forward in organized waves, hauling supply carts, oxygen canisters, stretchers. the air filled with shouted codes and the hum of the emergency generators. Rennick coordinated squads with quick, precise commands, while Cadia moved among them, guiding with quiet authority. Vale descended the ramp, every step deliberate. The vigil in ashes lay half buried in her own crater, her once white hull now streaked in ash and blood. Sections of her nameplate were melted away, leaving only vigil, a single word clinging to what had survived. As the first breech doors were forced open, smoke poured out, followed by shapes staggering into the light. Armor-clad, soot-stained, hollow-eyed. Survivors, dozens of them. Soldiers, officers, civilians. Children carried in arms too weary to tremble. The sight should have been relief. It felt like another wound. Vale moved among them, speaking little. His presence steadied those who met his gaze. The wounded recognized him, even through the grime, the disbelief, the long distance between their last sight of Cadia and now. A medic shouted, "We've got command survivors over here." Vale turned. Colonel Lisa Serin was being carried out on a stretcher, her armor stripped of color, her face gaunt but unbroken. The medici worked to stabilize her as she fought to sit up. When she saw Vale, she reached for him, and he moved closer until her hand found his wrist. Vale. Her voice was thin but sharp with purpose. It wasn't just us. There were more ships, a whole convoy. Not all made it through the rift. He crouched beside her. How many? Dozens tried. Maybe fewer survived. Her eyes flicked toward the smoke rising from her ship. But one followed us, a cruiser. Imperial markings, but her breath hitched. They didn't respond to hails. Their engines, wrong. Like they were burning through something they shouldn't. Rennick approached, overhearing. Another fleet. Could be reinforcements. Serin shook her head weakly. No, they came after us. Too close. Like they were tracking our warp wake. Cadia's expression darkened. Could it be traitor craft? Serin's eyes closed briefly. If they were, they've learned to hide well. Too well. Vale's thoughts tightened. He could feel the whisper stirring, not with words, but with recognition. Whatever followed the vigil in ashes had not come from outside the rift. It had come through it, following the same scars Cadia left behind, following him. The air shuddered faintly, a distant, low vibration that resonated through the ground. Not explosion, not artillery, something larger, a tremor of arrival. The Bastion's Vox relays crackled again, the signal fractured by static. Incoming, object detected, orbital, descent, bearing 220, no response to. Then the feed dissolved into a screech of feedback. Vale looked toward the sky. A dark silhouette cut through the haze, silent and slow, descending without flame or contrail. It did not burn through the atmosphere. It glided through it, the air folding soundlessly around its hull. No markings, no transponder, only shadow. Soldiers on the field stopped moving, their eyes lifting in unison. The wounded forgot their pain for a heartbeat as every head turned upward. The vessel was not large, no Imperial cruiser, no known pattern. Its design was angular, deliberate, unfamiliar, the kind of precision that whispered of forbidden craftsmanship. It drifted lower, passing over the manufactorum ruins, trailing faint embers that fell like dying stars. Rennick's voice came through clenched teeth. "What in the Emperor's name is that?" Cadia whispered the answer before Vale could. An echo. He felt it before he could name it, a pulse through the air like the beating of an unseen heart, matching the rhythm that once lived inside the grief construct. It was the same resonance, but colder now, focused, purposeful. The preacher had not merely survived, he had sent a message. The vessel halted its descent just above the Manufactorum ruins, hovering in perfect stillness. Its underside glowed with faint lines of light, symbols forming a circle that pulsed in steady, deliberate cadence. Not an attack pattern, a beacon. Vale's eyes narrowed. He's calling to it. Cadia turned sharply to him. To what? He looked at her, and the answer came without hesitation. To Cadia. The whisper surfaced, stronger than before, layered, resonant, almost gentle. He remembers what you would not. He will make the galaxy remember too. Vale exhaled slowly. So that's his plan. He'll use what remains of the grief to awaken every echo that died with the world. Cadia's hand went to her blade. Then he means to summon the dead. Vale shook his head. No, he means to make them live again. Rennick turned to him. What do we do? Vale's gaze shifted to the bastion's walls, to the soldiers still gathering, to the faint light rising from the preacher's vessel on the horizon. The city had not been reclaimed. It had only been borrowed from the edge of oblivion. He drew his sword. We go back, he said, before he finishes what I began. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of something vast, stirring beneath the Manufactorum once more. A second heartbeat joined the first. Cadia was not done, and neither was he. The march back to the Manufactorum began at dusk, when the last remnants of daylight clung to the world in thin, fading gold. Vale led the column through shattered streets where soot and broken glass crunched underfoot. Fires still smouldered in distant alleyways, sending thin streams of smoke up to the wounded sky. No voices called out from the ruins. No enemy patrol stirred. The silence was deliberate, as though the city itself were holding its breath, watching his approach. The dark vessel hung motionless over the Manufactorum, exactly where it had settled hours before. Its hull gleamed with an unnatural sheen. Neither metal nor stone, but something between. Something that remembered shape rather than held it. Faint runes pulsed along its underside, rhythmic and slow, in time with the heartbeat Vale had felt in his bones. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat distortion, except the night was cold. Cadia walked beside him, her shield strapped tightly to her arm. Her steps were sure, but Vale could see the tension in her shoulders. The quiet knowledge that the moment they approached would not be a battle of guns and steel alone. Rennick followed several paces behind, directing squads into staggered formation, rifles ready, heavy weapons teams positioned to strike if necessary. None of them spoke. At the base of the Manufactorum approach ramp, the air grew warmer, as though heat seeped from the stone itself. The glow pulsing beneath the factory rose and fell like the slow breath of something resting. The soldiers shifted, not in fear, but in instinctive recognition. This was the threshold of something ancient, something that remembered its own birth. Vale paused at the massive ruined gate. The metal doors, once sealed with adamantine locks, now stood open, not forced, not broken, opened, welcoming. Cadia's voice was quiet. He wants you to enter. Yes, Vale said. Rennick stepped closer, jaw set. If this is a trap, it is, Vale replied, but not the kind you think. Rennick's expression darkened, but he held formation. He had chosen his place, and he would not move from it. Vale stepped into the Manufactorum. The interior was changed from when they had last stood there. The furnace glow remained, but the machinery no longer moved. The great gears hung silent. The conveyor belts were still. The heat was steady, not wild. The space felt less like a factory now, and more like a cathedral. lit by embers instead of candles. The preacher stood at the center, beneath the hovering vessel. His robes were soot black now, scorched and torn. His face was thinner than before, lined as if years had passed in minutes. But his eyes were calm, almost peaceful, filled with a sadness so complete it had become resolved. He looked at Vale, and his voice did not echo. It simply existed. "You came." Vale approached, Cadia at his side, Rennick and the soldiers forming a perimeter behind. "You knew I would," the preacher nodded, "because you couldn't walk away from what you carry." Vale did not deny it. The preacher lifted his hand, palm open. The runes beneath the vessel brightened. "Cadia's grief was only the beginning," he said. "Every world that died in the Imperium's name left behind the same echo. You heard one, but the galaxy is filled with them." Cadia's voice was steady. "You intend to awaken them." "Not awaken," the preacher corrected softly. "Remember, the Imperium built itself on forgetting the cost of its survival. The dead are not honored. They are buried to preserve the myth of unbroken faith." His gaze moved to Vale. "But you remember, you always did. That is why it came to you." The whisper stirred in Vale's chest, not overwhelming, not consuming, simply present. Vale spoke carefully. "I am not your ally." The preacher smiled, but it was a tired smile, an old one. "You are not my enemy." He gestured to the vessel above. "This ship carries the psychic imprint of the first cry that rang out when Cadia fell. You touched that echo. You shaped it. You could shape the others. You could make the Imperium confront what it ran from. You could force it to remember the cost of every world it consumed." Vale's grip tightened on his sword. "And what then? Endless mourning? A galaxy drowning in grief?" "No," the preacher said. "A galaxy that finally stops lying to itself." Rennick stepped forward then, unable to remain silent. "At the cost of how many lives? How many worlds? You would bring collapse." The preacher looked at him, not dismissing him, but seeing him. "Collapse is already here. You mistake its slowness for stability." Silence followed. Cadia exhaled slowly. "You want Arcturus to choose for everyone." The preacher nodded once. "Because he already has, on Cadia, in the Manufactorum. Just now, when he returned." Vale felt Cadia's eyes on him. He did not look away. The preacher's voice softened. "You carry the memory of the fallen. You feel them, every one. You always will. That cannot be undone. But what you do with that memory, that will decide whether humanity drowns in grief or learns to build from it." The whisper rose again, clear, quiet, inevitable. "The dead do not seek vengeance. They seek rest. But rest comes only when they are remembered, not ignored." Vale closed his eyes, and in that darkness he saw them. Soldiers on the walls of Cadia, children huddled beneath bunkers, mothers clutching sons, commanders shouting orders with no hope left except duty, not screaming, not cursing fate, just living their last moments with dignity no god came to honor. Vale breathed in. Then he opened his eyes. He stepped forward, not toward the preacher, toward the vessel. Cadia tensed, but did not stop him. The runes pulsed brighter as Vale approached. The whisper grew warm behind his ribs, focused, waiting. He lifted his hand. The preacher closed his eyes in acceptance, but Vale did not touch the vessel. He placed his hand over his own chest, over the heart that remembered. "I carry them," he said, "not to drown the living, not to summon the dead. I carry them because they deserve to be remembered. But grief is not a banner to lead with. It is a weight to hold quietly." The preacher's eyes opened. Something broke there. Not anger, not disbelief. Understanding, painful, final. Vale turned his sword, not toward the preacher, not toward the vessel, but toward the runes binding it. He drove the blade downward. White light ripped through the manufactorum, pure, blinding, absolute. The vessel cracked, splitting in perfect silence. The runes shattered into fragments of fading embers. The heartbeat that pulsed beneath the city slowed, then went still. The whisper exhaled inside him. "Thank you." The light faded. The manufactorum went dark. The preacher sank to his knees, not in defeat, in grief that finally had somewhere to rest. Cadia stepped to Vale's side, her presence steady, unbroken. Rennick lowered his weapon, his breath shaking with the enormity of what had been prevented and what had been allowed to pass. Vale looked out across the darkened chamber. Not triumph, not despair, only truth. He spoke softly, to the living and the dead alike. We remember, and we move forward. Outside, the first true dawn in weeks broke across the horizon. Not bright, but real.